Sago everyone. Tuesday, September 29th. Nice wet day today, but I'm walking anyway. I got myself recently on sale some nice waterproof walking shoes. So it's my third walk for the virtual spirit walk, and I'm super happy to say that I'm almost at $2,000. So thanks to all the donors. I think we're maybe, 40-ish bucks shy of 2,000. So I'm confident that I'll be able to hit that new goal. I mean, it went from 750 to 1,000 to 1,500 to 2,000. So, and there's, over 10 days left. So maybe I'll have to push my goal a little bit higher, which would be awesome. Today's the third day that I'll kind of focus a little bit on the idea of accountability. I brought it up on the first day in connection with, relating to the land and stuff. I mentioned it briefly, and then yesterday's walk, I focused on accountability in terms of, when you have disposable income, in particular if you're a settler, and recognizing where that wealth, whatever the degree of wealth is, where that comes from, in terms of recognizing that, you may have worked hard for your stuff, but like as I have, as many of us have, but that money that we get, our wages and everything, come from the theft and exploitation of Indigenous lands. And to be able to access those lands, the Canadian government and the settler government before that engaged in processes of attempted assimilation and genocide. So those things you hear about with residential schools and the 60s scoop and displacing communities. I mean, it's all with the goal of not necessarily trying to physically kill people in all cases, especially, in the northern part of Turtle Island or North America, but, trying to assimilate people to kind of break that connection between people and the land, so that's where I'm going today in terms of kind of looking at that history, and not just, going, oh, it's in the past and I didn't participate in that, I was born way after that. So recognizing that Canada is built on that, and so it's in the fabric of our structure, our economic and political and social structure. So that injustice remains. It's not just in the past. So that whole project of trying to assimilate Indigenous people, convert them to Christianity, various forms of Christianity, and trying to break that tie, trying to break up kinship networks on which people relied, trying to break that connection of kinship between people and the land, because in Indigenous cultures, the land isn't just this lifeless thing to exploit. It's a living being, or a set of living beings, the land, the animals, everything that grows, they're kin, and humans are a part of that network and engage in a relationship of reciprocity. So you get nourishment from the land, food, water, things with which to make equipment and clothing, shelter, but you give back. And so the project of assimilation, in terms of trying to break that connection, because, and then things like the Indian Act, where you have fewer and fewer people who, according to colonial laws, get to call themselves quote unquote Indian or First Nations. Well, the less people who have that connection, the more easily the governments, so again, the federal government now and the settler government before that, it enabled them to have access to more and more land that they could steal, and using them as resources, mostly for the benefit of settler peoples, and So, all that to say that that's being built into the system that we have now. I'll wait for this truck to go by. And now the sidewalk cleaner. Yeah, I know I could pause, but that takes a bit away from the realism of this walk. So all that to say that, yes, everybody who's benefiting from that social structure, like I mentioned yesterday, is accountable. And this, was really driven home with this whole recent thing with John A. Macdonald. So as some of you may know, especially if you live here in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, or even in Canada, it was a big discussion in the news all over the country. So you might already be aware of this, and if you don't live around here, you might not. And there was a demonstration against racism recently, and people in an impromptu show of force toppled the John A. Macdonald statue in Montreal, and that statue's been painted all kinds of colors in recent years as protest. And that brought up this whole discussion of there's the whole thing of what are monuments for, what's their purpose, but this whole discussion of when you look at these historical figures, you need to take the good with the bad. And so instead of toppling them, you have some people who are saying, yeah, we acknowledge, John A. Macdonald did some shitty things to Indigenous people. And that's quite the understatement, for starters. But he did this great thing. He and others, they helped create Canada, this great nation we have today. And I read this, or I listen to this, and I'm like, do you not understand that thing that you're calling a good thing, it's a good thing for who? I know, when we're raised to see Canada as this great nation, this nation that takes in refugees from all over the world, and I know, and here I especially feel for people who have benefited from that benevolence, who are taken in and who are able to kind of start their lives here, raise their kids here in conditions that are safer than what they got away from, and who were kind of given this idea of Canada. But then what we tend to forget is that those conditions that people had to run away from are caused by that same process, sometimes colonialism in those homelands, or the impacts of multinationals based in these so-called first world countries who are exploiting people into poverty. It's all part of this thing. And then of course these newer arrivals aren't told about the history of this place, because already people who grow up here, as we know, our history books don't tell us about all these atrocities for the most part. It's getting a little bit better, but too slow, too late, too little, too late kind of thing. It's really hard for people to change their mindsets even in the face of new information. So you have this resistance. No, the good outweighs the bad with people like John A. Macdonald, because they founded this great nation. And again, that thing that they're toting as this great, brilliant thing, they're not even considering that, actually this so-called great nation is built on the backs of Indigenous people, and it all happened at the expense of Indigenous people. So who is benefiting from this greatness? It's not Indigenous people. And so again, all that to say, in terms of accountability, if you're benefiting from a system that is inherently oppressive to another group of people, then you're accountable for trying to right this, to right this massive wrong composed of a series of other massive wrongs that has and continues to lead to poverty, all kinds of social discord, and death. And so I'd like, folks who, maybe Some of my friends are already aware of this, people of all nations. And obviously if you're Indigenous, you're aware of this. So I'm speaking more to people who are brand new to thinking about all this and who have that knee-jerk reaction of going, well, none of this is my fault. Well, it's not about blame. Just like it's not about guilt, like I said in my first video. It's not about guilt, it's not about blame. It's about accountability and reparations. So, it's not enough to just say, oh yeah, all these things happened in the past and we're sorry now, but then not do anything. So again, maybe you don't have tons of disposable income and you can't really, throw money, but that's not the only thing, right? Lobbying, raising awareness, informing yourself, these are all things. And if you're brand new to this, I recommend, there's a course through one of these MOOC, Massive Open, I always forget what the second O stands for, Massive Open something course. And these are 12-week, sorry, my phone's talking at me again. Yeah, okay. So I program my phone for a number of kilometers, and at every kilometer it talks to me. Sorry about that. It's distracting. Yeah, so what was I saying? Accountability, right, the wrong. Yeah, so lobbying colonial governments. Oh yeah, I was going to talk about ways you can inform yourself if you're brand new to this. So this MOOC course through Coursera, you can take it for free, and if you want a little certificate of completion at the end, you can pay a fee of maybe 50 or 60 bucks. But you can do it all for free, and you do it at your own pace. And I really recommend it as a good way to start to inform yourself, and then committing to this as a lifelong project of continuing to enforce yourself, going beyond the 101, learning about the names of communities, especially the ones in the area where you live. These are all things that I can send you resources on if you need. I'll post these at some point on the fundraising page, so everybody who contributes will get that, but everybody else as well can ask me for these resources. And it starts there because, and then of course anything you're going to do is following the lead of Indigenous activists and Indigenous-led organizations. What do they need from you? Instead of kind of going in like some people go with a white savior complex. They need our help. They need to be saved. I'm going to go and help the natives. Just, that's an icky attitude, and people can smell it on you. So, humility is important. It's one of the 7 Anishinaabe grandfather teachings. And humility doesn't mean lowering yourself. It just means, well, first of all, recognizing that, again, I'm not making this up. This is stuff I've heard from elders and, different resources that I've read or listened to, people who've shared teachings with me. And so humility, that idea of like, just, you're a part of everything. We're all in this together. And so humility isn't about lowering yourself. It's taking that place and doing, sharing your gifts with the world. And so if you're committing to reparations and being accountable as a settler, is going, well, what can I do? And then read it. What do people need? Sometimes it can be something like helping to watch people's kids while they're at a meeting, trying to, do positive things for their community, supporting land defenders, bringing supplies to land and water defenders, all kinds of things. So these are all ways that you can be accountable, even if you don't have tons of money. Of course, spreading awareness, trying to talk to people who are, we don't need to waste our times with the ones that we know want to stay racist. We know sometimes that's a waste of time. But those people who are having these reactions, but they mean well and they want to get it, well, they're worth engaging with. So, yeah, I guess the last thing I want to say about that, because this is getting longer than I wanted it to, because I'm rambly and stuff, I'm not quite awake yet, is, this idea that, again, back to that knee-jerk reaction that people have against accountability, where they're like, well, it's not my fault. It's the same thing with like anti-black racism. I didn't own any slaves, or, you know, I didn't come and, you know, exploit indigenous people. And, you know, well, again, if you're benefiting from the system that is based on that, you are effectively accountable. And the other thing with that is that if you're willing to take the good and be proud of the accomplishments of your ancestors, well, then you're also inheriting the shitty things that they did. So, like, a nice thought experiment, well, nice, an interesting thought experiment is that, say you find out, say your parents die, you inherit a house that they lived in, that you grew up in, and then you find out the house was stolen, that when you were a wee baby or even before you were born, they moved in there by force and kicked the people who lived there before out. Maybe they were nice and built them a little shed in the backyard. And I'll try to talk about that in another video, about the link with all that, and they're like, our tax money, blah, blah, blah. Kicks people out of their house and take all their stuff and then build them a little shed. You're not doing them a favor, right? So if you were to find that out, how would you feel? This thing that you thought was yours isn't in fact yours. And that applies to all the land that we live on right now. And the thing is, it doesn't mean you have to pack up and go back to wherever your ancestors came from. For the most part, indigenous people, the ones I know personally, people that I know, activists, other people that I've read, for the most part, that's not what people are saying. There was always a willingness to share. And let's go back to that. Let's press the reset button. So that's my little rant for today. And this is kind of fun. I think I'm going to continue walking and ranting after this. Not sure how many people are actually watching this. If you've watched this to the end, hi! So again, thanks to donors, current donors and future donors. I'll be posting this to Facebook as usual. Well, YouTube and then Facebook, and including the link to the fundraiser. It's appreciated if you... I'm going up a hill now, so I'm winded. Share it, and again, explain why you're sharing it, why it's important. And you don't need to necessarily share this video. If people don't know me, what are they going to care? But if you think it might get some people thinking differently, you can share that too. Say, hey, it's my buddy Jackie. He has some things to say. None of what I'm saying is new, but I know that sometimes some folks who aren't in the loop and aren't necessarily following all the people that I'm following, maybe it's new for some folks. So if I can help people think about things a little differently, I'm happy to do that. So, see you tomorrow.